Well, welcome. We are really glad that you're checking out some of our content on how to do kind of best-in-class organizational design. And today, what we want to do is just give you a little more explanation and examples of what does this look like in practice. And I will tell you, the details of these types of products are very, very important. It's very important, the details, because, every single person, every single role, we're talking about people. So we're not going to do this in a comprehensive way because that would take 2 or 3 hours. But what we do want to do is give you all an example of what does this look like? What are some kind of key watch outs, things that you want to be kind of thinking about as you do these types of efforts, and kind of how we approach this when we're working with our clients on this type of work. So let me quickly talk about our firm. So we do a lot of organizational design and strategic planning are the most common things that we do. And, we come at this from a strategic perspective. We're very much of a growth-oriented consulting firm. Organizations, that's how things get done. And one thing we like to tell people is form follows function. So once you know what you want to accomplish, which is the function, does your organization, is it well suited to deliver on it? And, one joke that we always tell people is, your organization is perfectly designed to deliver the current results, right? So if you're happy with what you're getting now, then you're good. If you want something significantly better, you may have to take a look at your organization's design and how it's structured and run to get to that next level of achievement and success. So we've done this work for a lot of different clients. We have an example of some of our clients at the bottom of this page. But suffice to say, we've spent a lot of time working with kind of smaller, high growth, agile companies to really, really large, kind of $1 billion plus publicly traded enterprise companies. So as we talk with you about what we've learned, we'll be able to kind of bring in insights and experience from across the size continuum. So let me talk a bit about at a high level, and this always depends on the specific company situation, but the way that we like to think about it is there's these different phases. This is sort of like a nice starting point for an organizational design type project. Phase one is what's your current state context. This is something I think a lot of people overlook, but it's actually really, really important. What's going on today? How are things designed? How are things structured? What are the processes you have or the processes that you don't have? Really understanding that is really, really critical, and is how we always start our work with these types of projects. Once you've done that homework and you really understand this is how we're structured today, you can do the next phase, which is future state design. So this is, hey, I know what's going on now. What do we want to build? What do we want our future organization to look like? And that's future state design. That's kind of when people think organizational design, that's kind of what they're thinking. The third piece, I've got my design. Now we do implementation, okay? This is actually what is the plan and then the transition into this future state organization, right? And really delineating, hey, look, there's these 3 different phases you have to move across is really important to do this in an effective way. We're going to go through a bunch of content. I want to put this out in front. If you have more questions, if you want to follow up on this, if you would like access to a longer webinar, we sometimes will host kind of small group webinars on these topics with people in our network. Feel free to reach out to us. Email for our company is inquiries@rwadvisors.com. That's inquiries@rwadvisors.com. Feel free to reach out to us and we can kind of provide you more resources or help if depending on what you're looking for. So let me walk you through a bit of how that we think about this. So we like to think about there's these sort of 6 kind of key dimensions. And we've got kind of going in kind of a classic order. You've got organizational structure. So, who reports into who? What roles report into what roles, right? This is the raw structure. Actually does matter. Next is roles and responsibilities. Who's doing what, right? What is each person being asked to do? Then we have talent, okay? Who's doing the work? Who do we need? Where do we need strategic talent versus functional talent, et cetera? That's really the talent category. Key outcomes and metrics. What are the most important metrics for measuring this group's success? Governance. How are we running this whole thing? And then what are the processes? What are the kind of what are the core processes, the most important things that are being done across teams and potentially across functions to get work done? And who's taking the lead on each step and who gets the final decision rights are all things that kind of go into core processes. So when we do organizational design, we like to keep these in mind. A lot of times you might look at one or two or three of these, but it is really important to kind of have all three of them, all six of them in view as you do this work. So I want to give you an example. What does this look like in practice? You know, as you're starting to do that first piece, which is understanding the context. So one example that we would do is we would look and say, okay, look, we have these different roles. This is a marketing example. We have these different roles. We have campaign managers, strategists, market leads, event leads. And then we look and we figure out, okay, what are the key things that are getting done? There's kind of strategy and planning, execution, campaign, team coordination, performance management. And where are people spending their time? So we'll do an assessment to get that. And almost always, there's some really big insights that come out of this type of work. So in this example, one thing we learned was there was no regular comprehensive planning process, right? Despite this being a very large organization, right? They were kind of planning in a very ad hoc way, and the teams weren't really planning in a coherent, collaborative way. They were kind of planning on their own. So there were lots of issues going on, and there wasn't a ton of actually time being spent on that. Another issue that came up here, we had a lot of overlap in terms of content creation. We had different people, different roles creating a lot of content, not necessarily in a particularly coherent way and not necessarily in an effective way. And the other thing we managed is another thing that we realized was that there wasn't a lot of measurement, like is what we're doing working or not. There wasn't a lot of visibility. So there was a lot, relatively low amount of effort going into monitoring the campaign performance. And that was a really important priority for the company's executives. So that was really important to say, hey, look, this is a nice example of kind of roles and responsibilities and outcomes combined. Another thing that we'll look at, depending on the size of the organization, especially if we're doing kind of a pretty fulsome reorganizations, we'll look at spans and layers, which is basically how many people are reporting into each manager. And so in this example, you've got kind of the layers of the organization. So you've got the CEO, and then you kind of go down into the ranks of the company, and you can see how many managers they have, and then you can also see what the average span of control is, which is the average number of employees that report into a manager at that level of the company. And you can see, this company is kind of middle of the road until you get to layer 4, and layer 4 really stuck out for various reasons. In this case, the span of control was 2.9. That is quite low. Typically, even at the, there's some exceptions to this, but typically the smallest, you want 5 to 6. And then, the number of people who report to a person will go up as things become more operational and routinized. So call centers will oftentimes be somewhere in the 12 to 20 direct reports, but most corporate functions, 5 to 6, potentially up to 8 to 12. Well, in this case, this company was at 2.9. So that's a really important thing to think about. It's like, okay, that's low. And, we need to take a hard look at that as we think about redesigning the company. So when we do redesign projects, one really important thing to think through is, well, how could we design the company? What are the dimensions we could use? So this is a kind of a classic example for more of a go-to-market oriented function. You might say, well, look, we can organize around our product markets where we're selling. We could organize around our products. We could organize around the customer funnel phases. We could organize around our customer segments. All different ways to do this. And really thinking through, hey, what are the different ways that we can organize? What are the pros and cons is actually really, really important, and something that a lot of people kind of skip past. And we really encourage people to say, hey, look, if you're doing an organizational design, you want to slow down and really make sure, hey, look, we've really thought this through. We don't want to be typically what you typically see is companies kind of get fixated on how they've done it in the past. And it's really important to kind of go back and challenge your assumptions. So we think through the dimensions, and then we'll say, okay, what are some reasonable ways to do this? What are the most compelling ways that you might want to organize? And so in this example, we had different kind of markets. We organized around kind of market groups, and then we segmented by segments. And then each of those had different teams. And those were kind of our market groups. And then we have what we call these centers of excellence, an account-based marketing team, and then a globalization team that sat outside of the markets to really focus on these really important things. The point of this is you really want to think through, hey, look, what are these organizational models that we could use? Before you get down to the individual people and role levels, what are the basic models? And you really want to figure that out. And then you want to think through what are the pros and cons of each. So in this example, we could organize by market and then customer segment, or we could organize by market and then funnel phase, or we could organize by funnel phase and then market, or we could do the way we're doing it today, right? This is going to vary a ton, obviously, based on the company, but the principle and the approach is very consistent. This is a really, really effective way to think about it. Once you've selected a model, then you have to get down to the actual kind of organizational role level design. In this case, these guys decided to organize by market, and then they organized by kind of customer segment, so enterprise, middle market, and SMB, so customer size, by market. So they had different teams reporting in these market leads. And then, of course, they had their account-based marketing team that was sort of a separate organization for various reasons. So we had kind of helped them design, look, here's what we think this should look like down to the role level. Now, one thing that oftentimes will come out of this is the team you have today is not necessarily the team that you want to have in the future. So your current state is not necessarily your future state. And so in this example, we'll kind of figure out the role level, right? Do you need more or less people? And so in this case, they needed more campaign managers. They needed 5, if you look at the page. We needed less strategists. We needed less segment leads, but we needed more market leads. That's just kind of how this cookie crumbled as we did the project. And so over time, we want to migrate from a staff of 28 to 31, but there's actually a fair amount of shifting in there. Sometimes you can move people between roles, or sometimes you just have to go out to the market and find new people. And so it kind of depends on the situation, but really understanding, making sure your workforce planning is hitting your strategic objectives is really important. Once you got all this done, I will tell you, this is probably the second or third biggest thing that people screw up. Number one is thing people screw up is not thinking through all the ways to do it and being overly myopic. Number 2 is not designing the future state in a clear way. That's a big problem. That happens all the time. And then the third thing is not actually executing the transition well, which is kind of like being on the 10-yard line or, whatever your analogy is, and not getting into the touchdown, because it's like, okay, we know where we want to go. We get everything lined up and we screw up the transition, which is very easy to do. So we always encourage people to say, hey, let's slow down. Let's really think this through. This is kind of an illustrative Gantt chart, kind of laying out, look, here's the key things that you need to do a transition effectively. Each of these would have milestones associated with them. Each of these would have owners associated with them. So we can make sure, hey, is this being done well? If we're letting people go, are we letting them go in a coherent and consistent way, enterprise-wide? If we're changing someone's roles, are we doing that in a coherent way? Are we having good handoffs? If someone's taking on some work someone else was doing, is that being done well? That's all stuff that would go onto a roadmap like this to really make the transition seamless and effective. The other thing that's really critical is got to have some project management, transformation management around this type of stuff. So when we work with clients, we say, look, here's some categories. Here's stuff that needs to get done to move into the future state. Who's responsible? Who's supporting? Where are we? What's the current state? And what's our next steps? And what's the status? Really, really tracking this in a rigorous way is really, really important to make sure this is done effectively and well. So that wraps up the presentation. Like I said, if you have more questions, if you want to connect on this, if it's something you're thinking about doing, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to share more about our expertise and be helpful if we can. Feel free to email us at inquiries@rwadvisors.com, and we would love to get back to you. Thank you so much for the time.